A reading from Mark's Gospel, chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. One Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples began breaking off heads of grain to eat. But the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath?" Jesus said to them, "Haven't you read the scriptures what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God and broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. He also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. And so there is a superstition that is very prominent in Christian America. This superstition makes us evaluate what we do or what others do rather than contemplating what Jesus has done for the world. In superstition, if we're going to be talking about that today, really the definition is a belief or practice that is not based in reality or facts. An example of this could be karma. You know, if you do a good thing in the world, put it out there and it comes back to you. Or another thing that's really popular the last couple years is this law of attraction, meaning that if you can manifest a certain thing, it can happen in your life. And so I've been manifesting winning the lottery for some months now, and I'm sure that this is a superstition because I've only wasted money. But we'd be hard-pressed to find in any religion in the world without superstition. It just kind of comes with it. And as people, as humans, for some reason, we use superstition to make sense of the world, to gain a little bit of control over a mystery that's not making sense to us. And I find myself thinking out of superstition rather than faith when things get really hard. You know, maybe when I'm not living the most comfortable life financially, or my kid's getting sick or teething, or, you know, my wife's not having a great time in life in a season. When things begin to go wrong, I begin to hear this little thing in the back of my head say, you know what, this might be God's punishment, or this might be because you didn't do a certain thing. And I think that Christian people do that a lot, whether it's with our money or it's with our faith or doing this thing or that thing. We say, well, God will surely bless this because I've done it. Or God is not blessing this or blessing me because of what I haven't done. I think it's something that we always struggle with. And I understand that it's a superstition, but I still cannot help hearing that small voice in the back of my mind at times. You know, why is this happening to me? Is it something that I did? Is it my fault? And with these hurricanes that we've had, something that I've heard a lot actually was, you know, really how thankful everyone has been in Macon that it missed us, you know, that it veered off at the last second. I'm thankful for that too. But I've also heard some very interesting comments such as, you know, God, that was all part of God's good plan. And I've heard this over and over again, and it's begged the question in my mind, well, does that mean that it was his plan for those other people to lose their homes or their lives or their communities? I mean, what is God's plan really? But I think this is just an example, at least for me, that we try to make sense of mystery. We try to make sense of the world when things go wrong. When there are things happening and we're like, I have no idea why this is happening. I have no idea why I'm going through this thing. And so we really infuse and bottle up that situation, that mystery, in superstition. And so we all do this. We try to take control over mystery. You know, whether it's, I can't believe there's been 2 devastating hurricanes. And you might hear someone at the grocery store say, well, you know, God sent them as punishment because of the way that our nation is right now. That's a very common thing you can actually hear at the supermarket or somewhere else. We try to make sense of mystery by way of superstition. And I watched this interview recently of a great thinker, and the interview was conducted really when Facebook was taking off and social media and the internet was becoming more and more a larger part of our lives. And his prediction was that in the future, because we are getting so much information from so many different places without any kind of firsthand experience, we think we know a thing even though it's not right outside our front door. And so he believed that we would become a nation, or a world really, full of conspiracy theories. We would say that this thing is happening over here. Even though I'm not sure about it, I didn't see it myself, I know that it has to be because the internet told me so. And it's very interesting that he predicted that, because I've seen that in the last couple election cycles, where it's like all these conspiracy theories, and some of them are really fun. I mean, I have a hobby of following conspiracy theories because I get a kick out of them. But it's interesting that our mind goes there. It's interesting that when we see things going wrong in the world, or there's some kind of mysterious thing happening in our lives, we try to bottle it up with superstition. We try to add some type of control over that instead of just uncomfortably sitting in the mystery. And so I believe that we do this for control. But as Christian people, we're constantly doing this. I mean, working in ministry for as long as I have, the biggest one is tithing, right? People will literally think that they can buy God's movement in their life. Say, if I tithe this thing, then God will give me this thing. And I've actually worked in churches. I wasn't preaching in those churches, but I've worked in churches where that's been said from up here. If you want a blessing, you got to give a blessing. You got to bless God with your finances. And it's some weird way that we're wired, where it's like, I need to have more control over my life. I need to have more control over my world. How do I control God with what I do, with my behaviors? But see, a Christian life lived in superstition is not one lived in faith. And we're meant to live in faith. And with faith comes mystery. Even going to Bible college, the 2 different ones that I went to and the degrees that I've gotten, I know that I have to sit in mystery with God's kingdom. I know there's things that I will never find out, things that I will never uncover. And it doesn't mean that God is not true. It just means that being a finite being and encountering eternal God, there's a lot of stuff that I'm just not going to get to. There's a lot of stuff that I'm not going to be able to just hold in my hand. And so biblical faith really is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. And so this assurance and this conviction, that is tied to our faith. Superstition has no room when we have conviction with us, conviction of who Jesus is. And so the big point today that I want to make really is that we can't move God by our superstitions. We can't control our lives or control anything in the world by our own superstitions. See, mysteriously, we can't move God, but God mysteriously moves towards us out of his great love for us. There's nothing that we can do to control him, but there's everything that he can do to be a part of our lives. And so we've been in the Gospel of Mark, and we've been in the Gospel of Mark. We're in chapter 2 now, and we've seen some pretty incredible stuff. And it is a gospel that happens very quickly. There's only 17 chapters, and it's kind of written like a comic book. It's like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then they went and did this. And really in chapter 2, the whole chapter and some of the next chapter is really about who Jesus is. Clearly Lord, clearly the Messiah that they've been waiting for. But the teachers of religious law are having a really hard time with this. They're having a really hard time with this idea because this Jesus guy is healing people by touching them, touching people that he shouldn't touch, the man with leprosy. He's hanging out with people that he shouldn't be hanging around. And he's doing things that it seems like he shouldn't do. He's challenging the status quo. And really in our text today, he doesn't break God's law. He breaks rabbinical law. He breaks a law that the Pharisees made up themselves. See, Jesus came and fulfilled the law. He doesn't break God's law at all. He doesn't break his own law, but he fulfills it perfectly. And so this law, why there are different laws around different things is because really Israel was afraid of being punished, because in the Old Testament, they do get punished. They did get punished for not doing the things that God told them to do, or for doing things that they weren't supposed to be doing. And so these people made up extra laws. And it's kind of like an extra hedge of protection. So it's not like, oh, I crossed the line, now I broke the law. It's like there's a couple lines before that if you cross, you're getting closer to breaking the law. So it was this extra hedge of protection. And so in our text today, basically they're saying, look, you're breaking the Sabbath laws. You guys are eating, you guys are working the fields. And they're not really. What they're doing is a thing called gleaning. And gleaning is actually in God's law in the Old Testament. They're allowed to do what they're doing. But the Pharisees, in being so religiously strict, to the point of superstition, religious superstition, they see this as working. They see them as working the fields on the Sabbath day. And I think that when we're seeing the way that they behave, it's not very uncommon to see Christian people do that. It's not very uncommon to see ourselves kind of react and respond to things that people do because it's not Christian enough. Or, you know what, that doesn't fit our understanding of American Christianity, for you to dress that way, or for you to have tattoos, or for you to speak that way, or for you to hang out with those certain groups of people. We do it all the time. We've all experienced our own Christian superstitious laws. We've given them power, and they've had power in our lives, and they really operate, they change the way that we respond to God. They change the way that we view God, and it changes our relationship with God. And it's not a very good thing. You know, and some of the things that we abstain from, whether it's having that glass of wine at dinner or going to a certain place to see the band that you want to play, and maybe you shouldn't be seen there. You know, when we abstain from some of these things or put these laws or practices in our lives, they could all start out as good things. There could have been the best intentions there, but over time, we give so much power to our own superstitions that it separates us from God. And I was working in a church some time ago, and there was a Christian family, and they were only allowed to watch Christian movies, and they were only allowed to listen to Christian music. And it was very interesting being the student pastor at that time, watching their children. They had a lot of children, but watching their children grow up, and as they would graduate high school and get married and move on with their lives, they didn't see Jesus as the person really even in our text today. They saw themselves as Christian people if they did certain things. That's what related them to God, as if they followed out these laws and these rules in their lives, and they didn't relate to God through Jesus, through the person of Jesus and who he is. And so I think there's really there's an issue where we can give more power to being Christian or Christian practices than we attribute to who Jesus is as Lord. And I think it's something that we should be mindful of and something we should watch out for. So we should watch our superstitions and watch what kind of power we give them. Watch how that separates us from God or separates or really impacts the way that we relate to Jesus. But then jumping back into our text, Jesus says to the Pharisees, haven't you read in the scriptures that what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God and broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests were allowed to eat. He also gave some to his companions. And so he's saying, look, this is actually in the scriptures. The things that you're using to make up these extra laws, you know, what has been done before breaking the law? What do you have to say about that? And he's really calling into mind, he's trying to challenge their religious superstitions. He's trying to tell them, like, look, the way that you're living, the stuff that you're trying to put on us, the stuff that you're putting on other people, that's not real. That's not accurate. That's not right. That's not reality. And he continues on, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, and not the people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. See, God created the Sabbath for people, not people for religious things about the Sabbath. But he says this really interesting thing that the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. And in this chapter, he's trying to get people to see that he is the Messiah. And so this Son of Man idea is in the book of Daniel. It's also in Ezekiel, but it really means that he's divine. It means that it's this illustration of him coming on the clouds. And so he's trying to give them a hint. Like, you know, I created the Sabbath, and it was for you. You're not created for the Sabbath. It was to meet the needs that you have in your own life because we need rest. Because we need rest from a very busy and hard life. And I have a friend in ministry, and he went to a tent revival, and I guess they still have those. And he went to a tent revival, and, you know, everybody's getting revived, apparently. And there was this big commotion about some person that their wife was very ill. And they came to this revival kind of as a last resort. And they were, hooping and hollering and making a huge deal and proclaiming that they had faith that God was going to heal his wife. And so he took all the money that he had in his bank account, and he wrote that check and he put it on the altar. And he believed that that was going to buy his wife's health back. And unfortunately, the next week, she passed. And as they checked up on him, they were trying to figure out, well, why did you do this? I mean, what moved you to do this? And I think it's pretty understandable when someone you care about is sick, someone you love is ill, you'll do whatever it takes for that to happen. But I think we need to be mindful of how we view our relationship with God. Are we viewing our relationship with God out of service to him and serving in his kingdom? Or do we view our relationship with God as this kind of tit for tat thing? This thing where, God, I can move you if I give enough of a tithe. God, I can move you if I do the right thing. God, I believe in the law of attraction, and so I'm going to have faith that you're going to give me the winning lottery ticket or the winning thing. I think that we just get so wrapped up in religious superstition, and it's something that I want to call us to be mindful of this morning. When I was an Anglican, I was serving in an Anglican church as a pastor. I wasn't the priest, so I wasn't the head guy or whatever, but they needed a younger person in there to preach to a couple congregations that they had. And I came into the office one morning and poked my head in the sanctuary, and there was a candle lit. And the candle was lit in the back of the room, and I saw that communion and the sacrament was still out on the table. And so I thought I was being helpful, and I went and I cleaned up the sacraments. And, I poured the wine out, and I put the bread away, and then I blew out the candle because we were living in California. I don't want things to burn down. Those fires are kind of hard to stop. And later on, when we had our meeting with the deacons and the priest, and they saw that the candle was out, they saw that, the communion was put and stored away, you would have thought that I shot someone. You would have thought that I did some kind of anti-God ceremony on the communion table. And they were just appalled. And they said, look, you're not ordained yet. That's a 2-year process. You can't touch the bread. You can't touch that table. And the candle apparently was God's presence in the blessed communion. And so by me blowing out the candle, I blew out the presence of God in our church, which is a pretty horrible thing. But even in that situation, I think those people were a lot more disappointed in me than God was. And while I can respect those religious rites, I also think, we need to ask the question, when is too much too much? When is too far too far? When is Jesus not the main thing anymore? When is what Jesus has done for us on the cross not the center focus of any of our religious practices, or of all of them? Jesus says in the scripture that the Sabbath was made for people, but people weren't made for the religious rules that they had concocted around the Sabbath. What Jesus is really saying is that he creates things for us, not to be more religious, but so that we're cared for, so that our needs are met. And so if our religiousness feels exhausting, we're probably doing it wrong. If we're trying to do these other things where we're controlling people or controlling God, and it's taking a lot of energy and effort, and we feel like our needs aren't being met, we're probably focusing on the wrong things. God created the Sabbath to meet a need that we have, and he continues to create things in our lives, to move in our lives, to meet needs that we have. That's the kind of God that we serve, and we don't have to manipulate him or try to control him in order for this mysterious thing to happen in our lives. Jesus is Lord even over our religious superstitions, and I think it's time that we just start evaluating that. And so what should you do about this? I think it's just time to evaluate that. Do we have any religious superstitions in our lives that serve us more than they serve God, that serve us more than they serve people? And I think that if we begin to do that as a community, I think that this church can be a place where Jesus really is Lord over every decision that we make, everything that we do together, and really every ambition that we may have for this place. I think this place can be more about Jesus than about whatever it is that we think it should be about. Jesus is Lord over our religious superstition. Let's pray. God, I just thank you for